everyone, thank you so much for joining me in this video. Welcome back, and if you are new here, welcome. My name is Quinn, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. So I thought I would tackle something that I've been putting off for a really long time in this video, and it is making my favorite Vietnamese noodle soup. And it's called Bun Rieu. It's a crab-based noodle soup that I would always ask my mom to make when I was in college and I was not living at home anymore, and it was the one dish that I would crave the most. And I think a lot of it was because a lot of Vietnamese restaurants didn't really carry the soup, and if they did carry it, it wouldn't be very good. And although I've been cooking for over 9 years, I mostly make American meals or just recipes I found online. I have tried a handful of times to make Vietnamese dishes just kind of off the top of my head or like not following a recipe. And I'm not gonna lie, Vietnamese dishes to me have been very, very complicated and very hard, and I haven't really felt very comfortable making them. So I've been very intimidated to try to cook Vietnamese food again. But now that we've moved a little bit further away from the city, we don't have a lot of Vietnamese restaurants around. None of the ones that we do have in town offer Bun Rieu. So I figured I would try to make it in this video and record it and let you guys know how it goes. Now, before I move on, I want to talk about the importance of food in my life. For me, food is kind of like a love language. I have always been really passionate about food. I've had a really good relationship with food all throughout my life, and I think that it represents a culture so well. I know in Vietnamese culture, food is super, super important. Not only does it taste good and it's just very satisfying, but it also brings people together. When I was growing up, my mom would always have small gatherings where she would just cook a huge pot of some type of food or like soup, and she would just invite all of her closest friends and family over. And I remember, all of those people would bring their whole family, and so I'd have all these friends come over, and it was just a really nice sense of community, especially in Kansas where there were not a lot of Asian people. So having these occasions where I was able to bond with friends, it was just like a really fun way to socialize and to enjoy really great food. And so I just loved having that full house when I was growing up. And I think that's the case with pretty much every culture. I think every culture has food that tells stories, that brings people together, and it's a wonderful thing. So now that we live kind of in between Austin and San Antonio, we are kind of limited to the foods that are around us. And although Austin and San Antonio are both big cities, they are not very diverse in food, such as a city like New York or LA. And because of this, I'm not able to try as many foods as I want to. So I was thinking I want to start cooking or trying recipes from cultures that I've never tried before. And that way I can not only develop my cooking skills, but also experience foods that I haven't had the chance to try yet. So I want to start trying more of these recipes and exploring and kind of venturing out more. So with that said, I am going to start with my very own culture and my favorite meal and attempting this Bun Rieu recipe. So to make this video, I am mainly following a recipe that I found online, which I will link below. And I'm also going to be merging it with tips and suggestions that I got from my mom, because I feel like I can't attempt a Vietnamese recipe without consulting my mom, who is the best cook I know. So yeah, if you are interested, here is how I made my very first Bun Rieu, and then I'll let you guys know how it turns out. To make this recipe, I started by washing the pork riblets in a vinegar and salt mixture to get rid of any strong pork odors, then thoroughly rinse the ribs. This is a trick I learned from my mom, and it's her go-to method to wash any type of meat she works with. Then I went ahead and cut the riblets into individual rib sections. Next, I brought a large pot of water to a boil and added the pork ribs along with some large pieces of ginger and about a tablespoon of salt. The ginger also helps subdue some of the strong pork odors from the meat. After the pork ribs have been boiling for roughly 5 minutes, I drain the ribs, remove the ginger, and rinse the ribs with some fresh water. Most recipes call for dried shrimp. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any at my Asian market, so I peeled the shells from the shrimp that I'm using in this recipe and extracted the flavor from them instead. Shells have so much amazing flavor in them, and they often get overlooked, so sometimes I will save my shells, put them in the freezer, and add them whenever I'm making a seafood-based broth. To do this, I simply add the shells to a stock pot and brown them on medium to medium-low heat until they turn white and develop a golden brown color. Then I add the water or broth, which will deglaze and get all of the flavor off the bottom of the pot. Be very careful when you do this, as a lot of steam is created, which can burn you. I always do this by adding just enough water to cover the bottom of the pot, stand back, wait for the steam to dissipate, and then add the rest of the liquids. You can also turn off the heat and wait for it to cool before adding liquids. For this recipe, I added 3 quarts of chicken broth and 3 quarts of water. I then brought everything to a boil before adding the pork ribs back into the pot and also a tablespoon of rock sugar, which can be found at the Asian market. Next, it's time to prepare the herbs to go with the bun rieu. I started by squeezing the juice of a lime into a large bowl of water, to which I added the thinly sliced banana blossom. This will prevent the banana blossom from oxidizing and turning brown. I also chopped the cilantro, leaving out the stems, and plucked the leaves off the perilla and mint, and added all the garnishings to a large dish. Once the noodles were cooked, I drained the water and thoroughly rinsed off the excess starch and set them aside to dry. It is important to occasionally fluff and turn the noodles over so that they do not compact and clump together. Since I opted to use shrimp shells to season my broth instead of dried shrimp, I had to fish out the shells before continuing the recipe. Then I ladled some of the broth from the main pot into a smaller pot and brought it to a boil before adding my peeled shrimps for just a couple of minutes. As soon as the shrimps turned white, I removed them from the small pot and poured the leftover broth back into the main stock pot. Now it's time to make the crab ball mixture. This next step is a trick I learned from my mom. Traditionally, cooked shrimp isn't normally used in bun rieu, but my mom uses it to imitate the texture and look of crab by smashing it with the side of a knife. This breaks up the fibers of the shrimp and will make for a fluffier crab ball in the end. Also, this trick allows me to use less crab meat without compromising the flavor, which saves me money. So thank you, Mom. Then I took about 10 raw shrimps and gently smashed them with a knife before roughly chopping them. I like to do this instead of thoroughly mincing the shrimp to create a paste. I find that this gives the crab balls a better, lighter texture. So now I can finally make the crab mixture. I added the raw shrimp, cooked shrimp, an 8-ounce container of crab meat, and a pound of ground pork in a large bowl. Then I drained the oil from a jar of crab paste and added that to the seafood mixture. Note to self, use a larger sieve next time. Also, do not discard the oil, we will be using that later. So I started mixing this mixture before remembering a very important ingredient, eggs. So I added 2 eggs and mixed everything until evenly combined. Now the crab ball mixture is ready to go, just set it aside until needed. Next, I prepared the ingredients for the tomato mixture. I quartered about 8 Roma tomatoes, cut off the tougher middle part, and scooped out any seeds I was able to find and set the tomatoes aside. Then I diced about half a cup of red onions. Shallots are actually preferable, but I wasn't able to hunt any down, so red onions will have to do for this recipe. Following that, I minced about 10 garlic cloves. This might be an excessive amount, but I love garlic, so feel free to adjust the amount to your liking. I then heated the oil I drained from the crab paste jar in a large pan over medium to medium-high heat before adding the diced red onions and sauteed them until softened. Then I added the garlic and sauteed until the garlic turned a golden color before adding the tomatoes, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of sugar, and some pepper. I cooked this mixture for 3 to 5 minutes so all the flavors can come together. I probably could have stopped cooking a bit sooner since my tomatoes kind of lost their shape, but that's okay because I actually don't like big chunks of tomatoes in my bun rieu. Now I can finally draw my attention back to the main pot with the pork broth. Since it's been a few hours, a lot of the water I initially added have evaporated, so I needed to add that back in. I ended up adding back about 3 quarts of water to the pot. This amount's going to vary depending on how long your broth has been cooking, but it's easiest to try to take note of where the water level started and add that water back to the same level. I brought the broth back to a boil and added 2 bun rieu seasoning cubes and waited a couple minutes for them to dissolve into the broth. When the broth is at a rolling boil, I added large scoops of the crab mixture and waited until they floated to the top, which is a sign that they were cooked. Then I tasted the broth and added fish sauce to taste, which was about 2 tablespoons for me. Next, you can finally add the tomato mixture and the puffy tofu. Then stir everything together, bring the pot back to a boil for about 5 minutes, and then we are ready to serve. Okay, so I have my first bowl of homemade bun rieu that I've made myself in front of me. That was a lot of work, but I'm gonna see if it was worth it. So right here, I have kind of like the condiment plate. It has all of the fresh greens and herbs in it. So we have the banana blossom, some sliced onions, and then some chopped cilantro, perilla, and then some mint leaves, and then of course some limes as well in case you want like a fresh kind of acidic bite to it. And then this right here is a shrimp paste. So it's very, very pungent, but it goes along with this really well. It kind of adds a little bit of aroma and umami. And then I have my bowl right here. I'm going to bam up my bun rieu with all of these condiments. I'm gonna add some of the banana blossom, some green onions, cilantro. I like a lot of cilantro. And then my favorite are these perilla leaves. I think they make it so good. And a couple of mint leaves, and then just a little bit of lime, just for a little bit of freshness. Okay, cheers guys. Yeah, that's really, really good. I'm gonna add a little bit of this because it does need a little bit more saltiness, and this is gonna make it just perfect. So if you are making this and you've never had this shrimp paste before, be very, very careful. Just add the tiniest bit first and then kind of get a flavor for it, and then you can add more if you want, but it's just very pungent and it's very salty. So if you add too much, it's gonna ruin the entire bowl. I'm gonna try the pork, because that was in there for a really long time. I wanna say that I cooked my broth with the pork in it for at least 5 hours. It was longer than I intended. I didn't think it was gonna take me so long. So it had a lot of time in the pot, so it should be really tender. Oh, that's really good. It's like fall off the bone tender. I'm really loving this so far. I'm very, very happy with how this turned out. Like I would follow this recipe exactly. Flavors are just really good. There's a little bit of sweetness in there. The rock sugar adds like the perfect amount, even though there's only a tablespoon of rock sugar in here. It just did a really good job of like sweetening it and balancing the saltiness from everything. Also, the shrimp had a lot of like sweet flavor as well, and you can definitely really taste all of the shrimp flavor in here. I really like using the shells of shrimp because I think that there's so much flavor in the shells that just normally gets tossed out. So that's why I really like to cook the shells by itself and extract all of that flavor and get as much flavor as you can into the broth. And then of course, the pork bones add a lot of sweetness also, especially when you're using really good quality broth as well. It just adds to the depth of the flavor. Let's try one of these puffy tofu. It is so good. Since it's so puffy, it just soaks up all of the broth, and there's just so much flavor in there. The crab meatballs just turned out so beautifully. I'm so happy with it. It's super fluffy, and the texture is really good too. It's not super dense, and that's why I really like cutting my shrimp the way I did, boiling it first and then kind of shredding it and pounding it out like that instead of mashing it up, because when you mash it up, it just causes it to be really dense, and that's a trick that my mom taught me, and it really does make like this awesome meatball or crab ball. If you have not tried Vietnamese Bun Rieu before, I highly recommend trying this. Most restaurants don't really have them, and if they do have them, it doesn't taste that good in my opinion. So I would definitely try to do this at home if you can. It takes a lot of time, but it's actually not terrible. Like, it's very doable if you like cooking and you like kind of exploring and just playing around with food, which is exactly what this is. That is pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Have you tried bun rieu before, or do you have a Vietnamese dish that is your favorite? Also give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to click on that subscribe button right there and hit that bell notification so you can see more videos like this. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.